Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk about creating geoprocessing processing services with Python script tools. Basically, how to start with the script tool and then publish it, and some things to watch out for. I'm Andrew. I work on the GP team, and I mostly do. I work with this stuff, but I also do a lot of automated testing. So I've developed the front end and back end testing frameworks for Portal and ArcGIS Online. So if anybody has any questions about that, I'll be happy to talk to them. I'll be over at the Python island for the rest of the day. But this is another thing I'm good at, so let's go through what we're going to talk about here. First, I'll just hit you with the requirements that are needed to get started with creating GP services, and then how to just prepare those things to watch out for, and some considerations to make. Then a few just random tips and tricks, and then kind of what's next. What do you do now that you have the service, and what can you do with it? So let's start with requirements. So first and foremost, you'll need ArcGIS, you'll need server, but you could also have enterprise or portal, as it's otherwise known. If you want to start publishing to the server, what you'll need is admin or publisher privileges or permissions for that server that you have set up. So if you are the admin and you want to give your publishers, anyone who is a publisher, access to publish these tools, you can do that through this property in the server admin sort of setup screen, and you can select who's able to do that. You'll also need Pro or Desktop, which is going to include ArcMap and ArcCatalog. This is a workflow that's been available for a long time in ArcMap and ArcCatalog, and is also available in Pro. So you don't need Pro to do this, and you certainly aren't missing anything, I guess, by using Desktop instead of Pro, except for some advantages with sort of integrating your online or server accessibility with Pro, the nice interface that it offers for that. But in general, this publishing workflow has been available for a while now, and it's something you can utilize on just about any version you're going to use of the desktop software. One option that you might want to consider is having a federated server instead of just a single machine that includes server and an enterprise, which you're publishing to or copying data to. Having the federated server is going to allow you to publish tools to that server, that separate machine. And if something goes wrong with that, you can fix that without having to worry about any sort of damage or issues coming up with your server that's also installed in the machine. So it's nice to have. If you have a federated server, we recommend doing that. As it mentions in the slide here, you kind of have the heavy lifting done on the client side, and as it interacts with that federated server, and it doesn't do anything with the machine that has a server installed or enterprise, your portal. So the other benefit of that is if you have a separate data store, if you utilize that, you're going to get a bit of a performance boost because you have a, we'll say, dedicated machine or dedicated area of a machine, hard disk space that contains all those services that you're publishing. So a bit of a performance boost if you're utilizing a federated server and a data store, but not totally required. So we could get into preparing to create a GP service, but I'll show you just real quick how to actually publish these things using Pro. Let's grab a chair here. So I'm going to flip over to ArcGIS Pro. And if anyone was in my demo yesterday for creating GP tools, you'll probably recognize this data I have, just a bunch of cat sightings in and around the Redlands area. Clearly a lot of work was put into this. And, so we're going to make that, we're going to make a GP tool that reports on these cats. So, oh, it's not working? Oh, sorry. I think I know why. Let's try this. Hey, that's better. Thank you. So here's the cat data that I've mentioned. This is just the table for that data. what I have is a script tool, which I've created in this toolbox here. And what the script tool does, pretty simple. If I run it, you'll see that it just reports on some of the data that's found inside of my cat table here. It just tells me which of these particular rows have a friendly value equal to 1. So, you know, maybe not the most useful GP service ever made, but good for demo purposes. If I want to publish this, I can go to the history portion of my catalog pane, and I can see all the GP tools that I've ran throughout this today, actually, or whenever. I can right-click on any of the ones that were successful and just go to Share As, and as long as I'm connected to my either portal or a server, I can choose Web Tool from Share As, and if I click on Web Tool, it'll open up a new screen for me, or a new pane for me. Oops. Oh yeah, and so everything that you're seeing is my server and all that stuff. It's installed on my laptop today for demo purposes. I don't recommend doing that in like a production sort of way. To keep all the machines separate if you can. But here's the Share as a Web Tool screen. Pretty simple. There's a couple of required fields here. So here's my summary. Goes here. Here's a tag. Test is a popular one. And then here's the name of the tool. We'll do cats everywhere. And at this point, what I can do is analyze the tool to see if there's any warnings or issues that come up. In this case, I have, this tool is utilizing data that's not registered with my data store. So it's going to give me a warning about that, but it's going to say, if you want to publish it, go ahead. Once I want to publish, I just click the share button, and it starts the publishing process, which you can see in a little progress bar here. This might take a bit, especially since everything's on my laptop. So I'm going to flip real quick to my portal interface. And as you can see, I had previously published a tool called Cat1. This is the geoprocessing, or the script tool that we just saw run in Pro. Now it's a service on Portal because it's been published to my federated server's data store. If I click on that, I get the nice little endpoint for that tool, which should open up in a second here. And now that it's published, I can do all sorts of stuff with it. So let's talk about that. We'll jump back to the slides. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so great. So which preparation should I consider when actually creating that script tool for the first time? Well, you can, as you saw, that was a Python tool, which I used. I didn't show you the code for that, but behind that tool is a bunch of Python logic in a Python file. I could also use Model Builder. Anything that can be created into a tool found in a toolbox, you can publish that to as a web tool. Your service won't publish if the tool won't run. So when you saw me run that tool, that was actually part of the process of preparing to publish the web tool. If it fails for any reason, gives me a red X and an error message, I cannot right-click on that tool and select Publish or Share As Web Tool. I have to make sure it's running first and it's successful. In the wizard for creating those tools, you'll get an option for asynchronous or synchronous sort of running, like how do you want the service to run once it's been published and once people are actually using it. For those of us familiar with the REST API, asynchronous is probably familiar. If you run a tool and it's able to give you output as it runs, you're able to ping it and ask like, how's the progress going on this tool? That's your asynchronous behavior. Typically, it's just maybe a little bit slower than synchronous behavior, but for most tools that people work with, I'd say that is negligible. If you stick with asynchronous, it's a lot nicer for interacting with and for debugging. You can just check the status of it as you're running. So just something to consider if you're creating script tools. If we move on to the second slide for preparation, there's some considerations that are kind of Python-centric in this case. So what we want to do is avoid hard coding all of our data paths. If I have a data path on my laptop, for instance, that points to the data that I want to use that the script tool depends on, well, that data might not exist on the server once it is published. So we want to make sure there's no dependencies in the script tool itself on data that might not be found on the server later when someone's trying to run it. Because remember, when they're reaching out to that GP service, it's not on your laptop anymore. It's on a different machine. So a good way to get around that issue is to use these get parameter as text functions from ArcPy. These allow you to have the user select which parameter they want, or what they want to use for that parameter. You know, they can use their own data path or have a drop-down selection or something like that. And in Model Builder, you can set something as a parameter using that little P flag. You just select it from the node that you're setting as a parameter. If you do have hard-coded paths, make sure that you're building them dynamically if needed. If you want to switch between like a Windows and a Linux environment, those slashes are going to be different in your file paths, right? So using something like Python's OS module is probably a good plan. You're just building those paths based on the current OS that's being used, and that will provide a bit of dynamicism, I suppose, to those paths instead of hard coding them. Let's see. We also want to use system path append. Yeah, so if there's any modules that your script tool and thus script GP service depends on, make sure those modules are located on the server that is being published to, and make sure that the script knows where to look for those modules in case you're dependent on those. So that's good for custom modules, but in general, that's going to be okay because using the import statement in Python is going to already check your system paths, which you've probably set inside the server already. So something else to consider. When possible, and sort of to save time and create efficiency, maybe write intermediate or temporary data to memory. If your server has a lot of memory, probably more than like a laptop that you might be working with or something, it's no big deal to write a few data sets to memory whenever possible. So in the example that I have the Python code here. It says os.path.join. Then it uses that in-memory string, which the join function recognizes as, okay, we're not actually saving this output. We're going to write it to memory. I'm actually going to use that probably in another function or something like that. But then ultimately the output is what is important to keep, important to write to the hard disk. So try to use intermediate paths when possible and kind of speed things up a little bit like that if you can. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to move on to some tips and tricks. Okay, so this is probably the most, I would say, important consideration to make when you're publishing web tools. This consolidation process that's mentioned here. So in a nutshell, what it does, when you run a script tool and it runs successfully, and then you share it as a web tool, the process of sharing and thus publishing is going to check your table of contents, either in ArcMap or Pro. It's also going to check your Python script or model builder model for any data paths, any data that you're using from a geodatabase or shapefile, anything like that. It's going to check those paths and then very greedily sort of scan through any subfolders that are in that data path as well. It's going to look for all the data that's basically located in and around the data that you're using. And what it's going to do is copy that all to the server so that the tool runs successfully. This is a process that we implemented to help, I suppose, the tools run smoothly. So you want, it's a better experience to have your tools running after they've been published. This is going to help you do that. So something to maybe troubleshoot and check before you start sort of creating lots of web tools is to play around with this. Pay attention to what the hard drive space looks like on your server before you publish, then publish a tool that uses a certain amount of data or an expected amount of data, and see how much space is taken up after you've done that. This will kind of prepare you for understanding, I guess, or what to expect when you publish the tool, where how you might want to organize that data. Any data that is already on the server in the data store, that's not consolidated. So if you can reference data that's in the data store already, that's great, because it doesn't become part of the consolidation process, doesn't need to get copied, it's already available. It's going to publish a lot faster probably because of that, depending on how much data you're using. So yeah, just be careful with that. Consider using a geoprocessing package to store your project data. So the idea of project data being everything that the web tool utilizes, putting all that data into one nice, neat place that doesn't have those subdirectories that get consolidated, that's a great workflow. If you put it all into a package, that works too. We have lots of documentation on geoprocessing packages. It's an offering that we have in Pro at the moment. So you can check that out and see if it works for you. But this also works great for offline debugging. So if you're not familiar with geoprocessing packages, you can actually get off your network that you're currently using and accessing data off of, put everything you need in one package on a laptop. It's kind of like a zip file, and then bring it home and keep on working on it to make changes later when you get back to the office. So just something if you haven't used them, cool to look into. The other thing to consider is that tool validation. If you have any code in the tool validator class for your Python script tool, that also is published. That is utilized, but it should generally act the same. It should cause your tool to work the same on the server as it did locally for you. Something to test though, just to make sure that all the expected behavior is there and there's nothing kind of odd or any anomalies that might appear. So it's just something to pay attention to and kind of test out after you've published something that uses this tool validator code. All right, moving on. So what's next? Now that you've published a tool, what can you do? Well, they can be added to the portal. Obviously, I showed that already, and from there you can access them via Web App Builder. Users who have access to your portal can access them. And brand new for 10.6, Enterprise 10.6, you can access them in the analysis pane of a web map. And I can actually demonstrate that in a moment. So that's nice because I think a lot of your colleagues or customers might be used to using that analysis pane in a web map to run like create buffer or something like that. Well, now they can actually access those web tools that you are publishing. So it's kind of a nice one-stop shop. They don't have to do anything new or scary to get to that web tool. So upon completion, you can integrate the service into a Python or a model builder. Pro is really great at this. You just connect to that portal when you start up Pro, and then you have the portal drop down in your catalog pane. You can grab those tools that you've published right from there and stick them in a model, or call them in a Python script using the arcpy.import toolbox function. Same goes for ArcMap. You can do that there as well. It's also really nice if you want to do what I do and do some automated testing. You can easily do that now that your service has been published because you have a REST URL. You have a URL via the REST API for that web tool that you've created. So it's pretty simple to just submit a job to that tool with whatever parameters you want to test out. What else? Oh yeah, and for more information, more specific stuff about what I've mentioned here today, check out the what is a geoprocessing service documentation. If you just Google that phrase, that documentation will come up right away, probably be the first result. And that will give you a good idea of any other considerations you might want to make, or more specific stuff about what I mentioned. There's other things as well, such as if you have parameters in your tool, there's a limited number of parameters that actually work in the web tool versus what, like the hundreds that you have, or maybe about 100 that you have available in ArcMap and Pro. So picking your parameters for your script tool based on what you want in the web tool, it's a good workflow to follow and something to consider. So this documentation will have something like that. So I know that was really fast. I apologize. But we did end on time here. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us. It's great to talk to everyone at the island, and I always enjoy hearing what everyone's up to and hearing what we could do better and what they like about what we do as well. So feel free to stop over. I'm at the Python Island pretty much all day till 6:30. And if anybody has any questions right now, I'd be happy to take a couple before we clear out. Yeah. Yeah, you can just shout it out. That's fine. Yeah.
So if I have a script tool, and that script tool has validation, is that validation then carried through to the client?
Is it carried through to the client? I think.
So my customer then sees or plays with the validation, which I've done in the script tool already. So
Yeah, I believe it runs client side, actually. Yeah, that sounds about right. I could double check that, but I'm like 99% sure. Yeah.
Yes, you talked about the medium to large tools using asynchronous, right?
Yeah.
How do you consider which one is large or small? Like your cat tool, is it
Yeah.
small or large?
That's a very small tool. Yeah, that's like something that's going to run really fast. But if I had a million records inside of a table that I'm running that tool on, that might take a while. So if I have a tool that I expect to run for maybe half a day, something like that, I might want to use asynchronous reporting just so I can check in on it and see that it's running smoothly. For something really small or something that I expect to only use small data sets or maybe not take a long time to run, maybe synchronous is fine too. I'd say the safe option is always asynchronous, but you might see some performance boost if you choose synchronous. So, no problem. Oh yeah. So the question was, should I use asynchronous or synchronous? And then your question was, does the tool validation run on the client side? Which it does. So, yeah. We could probably do one more question if anybody has one. One in the back? Yeah. So I think the question. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think the question is, while I'm developing the tool, while I'm writing the Python, how do I ensure that any dependencies I've created via the place I'm developing that tool are accounted for? Is that right? Okay? Yeah. So I've gotten this question a lot today specifically about Jupyter Notebook. If I'm using Jupyter Notebook, does that change anything? Or should I even use Jupyter Notebook for developing tools? I personally use PyCharm. It's an IDE. It has great debugging. It knows how to color the words that I'm using in a way that I can see easily, so I like it. And there isn't really any dependency for the web tool or even a script tool based on where you develop the tool. So you can write your tools or your Python code, whatever you want, in Jupyter Notebook or PyCharm, and that's where you maybe test out the code. But the real dependencies are in whether or not you are using data that's accessible to the server. And the real dependencies are the stuff that will break the tool, basically, come from the logic in the Python that ultimately runs when you run the script tool. So, yeah, so the question is, are the modules that Python uses, and what was the other one? There was modules and, yeah, maybe site packages. Are those things uploaded to the server automatically? The modules are not. If you import your own custom module, I can make my own module right now with 0 lines of code, I guess, and then import it. That will not be automatically uploaded to the server. So make sure that those modules are, copied to the server by the time the web tool is ready. So if I have that dependency with my tiny module, I got to make sure I wrote that, saved it on the server, and then that the tool knows where to find it. And actually, that sort of system. Let's see what time we got here. Okay. Yeah, that middle option here, the system path append, that's a great way to just point your tool directly to the location of that module and prevent that dependency from breaking the tool. Yeah, and if you have more questions about that, I'll be over at the Python island right now. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.